My name is Jade Ellis, and I am 28 years old. And when my mother called me last spring to tell me my parents needed help with their bills, I already knew two things. I knew that my brother Caleb had not been asked first, and I knew that the answer I was going to give was not the one she was expecting. To understand why those two things were true, you need to understand what happened 10 years earlier in our living room in Columbus, Ohio, on an August evening, 3 weeks before I was supposed to start my freshman year of college. My parents had told me about the fund when I was 14. Not in a formal sit down conversation, in the casual, confident way that parents mention things they want their children to know are there. Woven into discussions about the future, referenced when college came up in conversation, presented as a fact of our family landscape that I had no reason to question. The fund existed. When the time came, it would be there. That was the understanding I had carried for 4 years while I built my academic record and visited schools and made the specific, careful choices of a student who believes her family has provided a foundation she can plan on. The fund was $42,000. I knew the number because my father had mentioned it once when I was 16 in a conversation about what colleges were realistic. $42,000. It would not cover everything, but it would cover enough to make the rest manageable. At the August evening meeting, 3 weeks before my freshman year, my parents told me the fund was not available for me. My mother did most of the talking. She said Caleb had needed significant support over the past 2 years, tutoring and a gap year program and some other costs she did not itemize specifically, and that the fund had been drawn down to cover those needs. She said they were sorry it had worked out this way. She said she knew I would figure it out. She said Jade always figures things out. She said it like it was a compliment. I went to my room. I did not say the things I was thinking because the things I was thinking were too large and too sharp for that room on that evening, and I understood even at 18 that saying them would produce a defensive conversation rather than the honest reckoning that was actually needed, and that was never going to happen anyway. I sat on my bed and I looked at the wall and I made a plan because making a plan was the only available response that was going to produce anything useful. The plan was loans, scholarships, and work. That was the whole plan. I applied for every scholarship I qualified for and received three smaller ones that reduced the gap. I took federal student loans for the rest. I got a job at the campus library for my freshman year and moved to waitressing for the remaining 3 years because waitressing paid more and I needed more. 25 hours a week alongside a full course load in accounting because I had chosen accounting specifically for its employment prospects and its concrete relationship with numbers, which were things I had learned to trust more than promises. I graduated with honors and $31,000 in student loans and 4 years of the specific exhausted competence of a person who has been doing two things fully simultaneously for long enough that it has become simply the texture of her life. The job came quickly because I had positioned it to come quickly. I had been networking at every opportunity available to a campus based accounting student with limited time and significant motivation. The career fairs and the professor connections and the informational interviews I had scheduled during the lunch hours I did not spend eating. I had a role before graduation, a staff accountant position at a mid-sized firm in Columbus that paid me enough to begin addressing the loans while establishing the professional foundation I needed to build on. I lived on a budget that had almost no margin in it for the first 2 years. Not because I was bad with money, because I had allocated every available dollar with the specific precision of a woman who has a number she wants to eliminate and a timeline she has committed to $31,000 in 4 years. That was the plan. The plan required that I treat it like a mathematical problem rather than an ongoing emotional weight, and I am good at treating things like mathematical problems, which is why I chose accounting and why the plan worked. I paid off the last of the loans 4 years and 2 months after graduation. I made the final payment on a Saturday morning, and I sat at my kitchen table with the confirmation email open on my laptop, and I felt something I want to describe accurately because inaccurate descriptions of this kind of moment do not serve anyone. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt the specific, clean relief of a person who has been carrying something for 4 years and has set it down and can now see clearly in the direction it had been blocking. I had set it down. The direction it had been blocking was my own future, unencumbered by the debt that had been created by a decision I had not made and had not been consulted about and had not been given the option to refuse. Caleb, during these 4 years, had continued to operate in the way he had always operated. He had started 3 things and not finished 2 of them. He had moved back in with my parents twice. He had received, to my knowledge, continued financial support from my parents in various forms across the years, none of which was my business to track or to resent, because what my parents chose to do with their resources beyond the college fund was their own matter. I had dealt with what they had done to my resources. I was not responsible for what they had done with theirs. My relationship with my parents during these years was functional and somewhat limited. We spoke on holidays and birthdays. I visited twice a year. The conversations were warm on the surface and carefully bounded by an unspoken agreement on both sides that certain topics were not going to be opened because opening them would require an honesty that my parents were not ready for and that I had decided not to force. What I had decided instead was to wait, not with bitterness, with patience. The kind of patience that comes from understanding that the full picture of a situation tends to arrive eventually, and that when it arrives, you will be in a better position to respond if you have been building rather than stewing. The full picture arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in April when my mother called. My mother's voice on that April call had the specific quality it takes on when she has something difficult to navigate and is approaching it with the organized warmth she uses for difficult things, the warmth that is real and also strategic, that genuinely wants things to go well and is also preparing the ground for a specific outcome. I had known that voice for 28 years and I recognized it immediately. She said things were tight. She said my father's retirement savings had not grown the way they had projected. She said there were monthly bills that were becoming difficult to manage on their fixed income. She said she had not wanted to ask, but she wanted me to know the situation. I asked about Caleb. She said Caleb was going through some things right now and was not in a position to help. She said it with the specific, gentle firmness of a woman who has closed a subject while presenting the closing as a fact rather than a choice. Caleb is not in a position. Full stop. No further examination invited. I said, "What kind of monthly support are you thinking?" She said, "Whatever you could manage would be a help." She named a figure. It was significant but not impossible. She said she knew I was doing well. She said Jade always figures things out. There it was again. I want to be careful here about what I am going to say because I have spent time thinking about it, and I want to say it accurately. When my mother said, "Jade always figures things out" on that April call, I did not feel the same thing I felt when she said it in the living room in August 10 years earlier. At 18, the sentence had landed as a wound. The specific wound of being told your capability is the reason your needs do not have to be considered. At 28, the sentence landed as information. Complete, clear, and not requiring any additional processing. The information was this: my parents had a model of what I was to them and what I owed them, and that model had been built in a specific way and it had not been updated in 10 years. In the model, I was the capable one, the one who figured things out. The one whose figuring it outness meant that the resources could flow toward the one who needed more support because the capable one would manage. The model did not include the 40 minutes I sat on my bed at 18, making a plan because the ground had shifted. It did not include the 25 hours a week for 4 years, or the 4 years of loan repayment, or the specific daily cost of being the capable one in a family where capability was rewarded with additional requirement rather than additional support. The model was convenient, and it had been operating unchallenged for 10 years. And what my mother was doing on that April call was operating from the model with the specific confidence of a person who has never had to examine it. I was going to examine it, not with anger. With the same precision I brought to everything else.